Hey everybody, welcome back to our channel. Today I am going to show you exactly how I go through making beef jerky. If you're interested in using the dehydrator I'm using in this video, check the link in the description box below. For starting with the marinade, I am going to be using this. It is a Rubbermaid 1.1 gallon tub with a lid on it. For the meat that we are turning into jerky today, I am using a round steak that I picked up at the market this morning that is nice and fresh and lean. There's slight marbling throughout the steak, and there is one big giant vein of fat running through it that we can easily cut out the side. Before we go any farther, there's a few bits of information that I would like to share with you. It is very important to remember that most meat will only be 1/3 the size after being dehydrated. That means for every 1 pound of finished jerky, you need to purchase 2.5 to 3 pounds of beef. Next, you'll want to know the 4 best cuts of meat that are recommended for making jerky. That would be the flank steak, a brisket flat, an eye round, top round, or bottom round, and ground beef. These cuts of meat tend to yield a more tender and flavorful jerky. My next 2 tips are about cutting. A helpful hint is to chill the meat before cutting. This helps with the stability of the muscle fibers as you cut through. The next tip is about the direction you decide to cut. A familiar saying is to cut against the grain. Remember that the meat is made of long muscle fibers that are parallel to each other. By cutting with your knife parallel to the grain, you'll end up with a super tough bite. By slicing against the grain, you'll end up with a very short muscle fiber that can easily fall apart. My final tip is to watch your meat like crazy. The first few hours will be a slow change for the dehydration, but those final few hours are where things really start to matter, so be on a Next, we will start building our marinade. I will begin with 2 cups of just plain water. Next comes the jerky seasoning. The brand I'm using comes with 2 separate bags. Make sure to follow the directions on how much to add per your brand choice. Each bag should be labeled seasoning and cure. Cure is the bottom and seasoning is the top. The next ingredient I like to add is soy sauce. It gives it a surprisingly little light tingly taste to it. Usually I will add about a tablespoon of this, but I didn't have much left in the bottle, so I just went ahead and poured the rest of the bottle in. In this house, we like our Jack Daniel's Tennessee whiskey, so I'll go ahead and add about 2 to 3 tablespoons of this. I usually take it and pour it out into a little bit of a sauce cup, and that gives me a good idea about how much I like to use flavor-wise. And then afterwards, it never hurts to always give it one little extra, little kind of splash in there too. The next ingredient I'll be adding is a little bit of garlic powder. I will do both garlic powder and also in actual garlic that I have roasted and set up in a little bit of olive oil that was fresh earlier in the week. That way we get 2 different tones of garlic. I'll use about a good tablespoon of the powder and then just a little bit of a spoonful of the fresh. After we put the fresh garlic in, we'll go ahead and mix it up to make sure that it is all blended well. At this point, I'll do a depth check. You want it about 1/4 to 1/2 way up a spoon, just a normal regular teaspoon. That way it completely covers your meat. Now we're going to get into chopping up our beef. I'll go ahead and start with a very sharp knife, and you want to cut very, very thin slices. You can see on this one it has that really thick fat vein running through it. What I'll do is I will chop off that little chunk and keep the good bits and toss it straight into the marinade. You want to make sure that it's not too thick and not too thin. Once you have all of your meat chopped up, make sure to spread it apart, give it a good toss around in the marinade, make sure everything has been completely coated, and then kind of push down all of the little bits and pieces to make sure that it is as covered as possible. Once you're done, I recommend grabbing your lid and setting it lightly on top, then putting it in the refrigerator to marinate for as long as you would like. Afterwards, it should look something like this. Due to the draining of the marinade, it's lost a little bit of its seasoning, so I like to add some back. I'll start off with giving it a little bit of garlic powder and a little bit of the seasoning from the jerky, as well as a little bit of Jack Daniel's beef rub. Once that's all in, we'll give it a good old mix together, and then it'll be time for our dehydrator. So for this particular batch, I'm going to be doing 2 different kinds. I'm going to do a spicy one, which I have labeled with a B for the extra barbecue, and the rest are all just going to be plain with the rest of the marinade. The dehydrator I'm using is the Nesco American High Wrist Food Dehydrator and Jerky Maker. At the bottom, it gives you a little bit of the temperature degrees. For this one, I am going to be cooking it at 160 degrees Fahrenheit. We'll just turn the knob up all the way to the top and we'll let it set for 5 full hours. So taking off all but the bottom tray, one thing I would recommend doing is underneath this bottom tray is putting the fruit tray underneath it. It just helps to catch any extra drippings and make cleanup a whole lot easier. Since this is our spicy barbecue one, I have the meat pre-prepared and separated from the others on the side, and I'm just going to start laying it out, making sure each piece is nice and flat and well distributed across the tray. Since I only had enough of the spicy jerky to fill up one bottom tray, I'll use the top tray as a separator between the top of the dehydrator and the rest of the beef jerky. As you're going through, you want to make sure that all the little ridges line up between your trays, that way there are no air gaps between to let the extra heat out. Now we are all set to start our dehydrating process. Make sure that everything is all lined up correctly, and then all you have to do is take the cord and simply plug it in. 2 hours into our dehydrating process, I like to stop and check and see on our meat. You can see that it is still rather firm. It'll be a little bit squishy to the touch, but it should feel slightly dry on the surface. This is definitely a sign that everything is working correctly and to continue in your process. In your 3rd hour of dehydration, you should see a slight change in the color to a little bit of a darker tone. The meat itself should still be very soft and flexible to the touch. By your 4th hour, you should notice a little crisping around the edge of each piece of meat. My best recommendation at this point would be to grab a piece, feel it, see how flexible it feels, and try to pull it apart and see how easily it falls apart. See if it's still squishy and how much longer you need. This is the point you really need to start watching. By the 5th hour, most of your jerky should be finished. It should be very easy to pull apart and have a little bit of a crispiness to the edges of it. If you grab a little bit of a thicker piece, it should still remain a little bit of its squish, but still should be easily pulled apart. For your thinnest pieces, they should be very easy to snap right in half. Based on these outcomes, I can say that I am very happy with pulling the beef jerky off at this 5-hour mark and saying that it is finished. So thank you all for stopping by and watching our video today on our beef jerky making process.